Welcome to this lecture where we will be discussing the training needs analysis model. What does this mean? Well, first things first, a training needs analysis model looks at the needs of the organization and walks all the way through to where we're able to look at the needs of individual persons, okay? And it asks specific questions and outlines very specific steps that you need to take to get a holistic view of the kind of training you need to address both personnel challenges, job challenges, requirement challenges, and organizational challenges. Now, before I continue, this is actually a model that's developed by Mobino.biz, which I thought was fantastic. And I would like to just send them acknowledgement before talking you through this video. From the needs analysis, you will then be able to really develop a holistic training development plan. More about that later. Let's begin by thinking about the steps of organizational support. When we think about support, these are different to analysis. Okay, an analysis is almost problem solving, whereas support is for you as the trainer or you as someone who is identifying the needs. You need to essentially garner political support from the organization in order to do the analysis. That's a very critical piece of training, in that without support of the top people in the organization, training can often fall on the wayside. So your first step is to establish relationships with top management, other organizational members, and form a project team. This is hugely critical to the success of your work. Political capital is one of the core foundations of training. And this is something that is often misunderstood and often disregarded, but it is a critical component because once you get that, you're then able to really analyze the organization. You're able to look at specific goals for training, think about the training climate, and identify external and legal constraints on your training. Okay, so when we're thinking about the training climate, we need to think about how people feel and how people approach training. In learning organizations, training is seen as part of the job. Whereas in other organizations, training is actually seen as an accountability measure. And so these are the kind of things you need to be thinking about. You also need to be thinking about your legal constraints in the area of diversity, equity, and inclusion. We often think about the legal constraints and the legal challenges as a result of some of the work that we do. Now, once we've set out these goals, we're then able to think about what requirements the organization needs, okay? And so in order for this organization to achieve its goals, it has to have specific jobs that will need to be filled in order for it to achieve those goals. So for example, you're thinking about the fact that in a factory that produces cars, you probably need an engineer or someone who understands the full length of a car, for example, the engine, the tires, the prop shaft, those sort of things. And so you would need to define those job targets. Okay. Once you've defined those sort of jobs, you then need to think about your needs analysis method. So in other words, what are you going to be asking those people who say that they have those skills to do so that you can actually figure out whether they have those skills or not. You then need to determine who they are, how you're going to contact them, anticipate any problems, and develop a protocol. You're then going to jump in to the actual analysis of their job. So if this is an engineer who says that they know how to put together an engine, you've defined them, you've chosen how you're going to analyze them, you've determined who they are, how you're going to connect with them, any problems, you've developed a protocol. You now need to actually analyze their ability to fulfill this job. So just as another example, in the area of Salesforce, which is a customer relationship management tool, we would ask people, for example, to actually produce a report. We would develop tasks and ask them to complete those tasks. We would think about the knowledge that they need, the skills and the abilities that they would need. And then once we've done those assessments, we would then actually think about what it is that is lacking and what it is that we need to test. And from there, we then begin to really understand what people know and what they should know. And these are what we call performance indicators. once we've actually developed our performance indicators, we can then understand what we want and the gap between what we want and what we have. And then from there is where your training development plan begins to emerge, because then you're designing the training development plan around resolving these training gaps. So, for example, in the case of the engineer, perhaps they know how to work with um, a three-piston engine, for example, and the requirements going forward are actually technical based engines, or diesel engines. And so your performance indicator is a diesel engine, and this person who's the engineer has only knows a three-piston engine. And so there's a gap there. In the instance of Salesforce, perhaps the person knows how to run a summary report but does not know how to build a joint report. And one of the performance indicators is that they need to be able to build a joint report. Well, that's where we understand the gaps, and that's where we need to build the training around. And so that's how this training needs analysis model fits. And this is the process that I highly recommend is taken as you go about understanding the organizational needs and the person needs.